The dust swirled around Ruby Mitchell's body as the rough hemp rope dug into her wrists. Her screams lost to the thundering hooves and creaking wheels of the wagon that dragged her mercilessly across the barren desert. The year was 1875, and in the unforgiving territory of Arizona, family could sometimes be the deadliest enemy of all. Owen O'Malley spotted the cloud of dust from nearly a mile away, the silhouette of a wagon moving at dangerous speed across the flatlands. Something wasn't right. Squinting against the harsh sunlight, he caught sight of what appeared to be a body being pulled behind. Without hesitation, he dug his spurs into his stallion's flanks and charged forward, his hand already reaching for the knife at his belt. "Hold on," he shouted, though he knew the poor soul couldn't hear him over the distance and commotion. The wind whipped his dark hair beneath his Stetson as he leaned forward in the saddle, pushing his horse to its limits. Ruby's consciousness faded in and out as rocks and cacti tore at her already shredded dress. Her cousin Vernon had finally made good on his threats. After her father's death 3 weeks prior, Vernon had shown his true colors, determined to claim the Mitchell homestead by any means necessary. When she'd refused to sign over the deed, he decided she would suffer a tragic accident in the wilderness. "Nobody'll find you out here, cousin," he'd sneered as he tied the rope around her wrists and secured it to the back of the wagon. "Might take a few days for the buzzards to pick you clean, but that's more mercy than you deserve." Her lungs burned from the dust, and her skin was raw and bleeding. Death would be a mercy now, she thought, as darkness threatened to overtake her vision again. Owen drew closer to the wagon, close enough now to see the driver and another man seated beside him, both focused on the path ahead, seemingly unaware or unconcerned with the fate of their victim. He could make out long hair matted with dust and blood a woman. His blood boiled with rage. With a final burst of speed, he managed to flank the wagon. The passenger spotted him first, eyes widening in alarm as he reached for his pistol. Owen was faster, drawing his Colt and firing a warning shot that splintered the wood near the man's hand. "Stop the wagon!" Owen roared, his voice carrying the authority of a man who wouldn't ask twice. The driver shouted obscenities but pulled hard on the reins, bringing the horses to a reluctant halt. The woman's body slid forward in the dust, finally coming to rest as the wagon stopped. "This ain't your business, stranger," the driver called out, his hand hovering near his holster. "I'm making it my business," Owen replied, his voice deadly calm as he kept his pistol trained on them. "Cut her loose. Now." The second man spat into the dust. "That's Vernon's cousin. She's getting what she deserves." "I won't tell you again," Owen said, cocking his revolver with a distinctive click that echoed across the empty landscape. The driver glanced at his companion, then back at Owen, measuring his chances. Apparently deciding they weren't good, he slowly climbed down from the wagon. "Fine. Take the bitch. She ain't worth dying over." Owen dismounted, keeping his gun trained on the men as he approached the motionless woman. With his free hand, he pulled his knife and cut through the rope that bound her wrists to the wagon. Her skin was raw and bleeding where the rope had burned through. "If I ever see either of you again," Owen said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'll kill you both without hesitation. Now get out of here before I change my mind about letting you live today." The men exchanged glances, then scrambled back onto the wagon. The driver cracked his whip, and the horses lurched forward, leaving Owen alone with the injured woman in a cloud of dust. Owen holstered his gun and knelt beside her. Her face was caked with dirt and blood, but he could see she was young, perhaps in her early 20s. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Gently, he brushed the hair from her face. "Miss, can you hear me?" Ruby's eyelids fluttered and she flinched away from his touch, her body tensing as if expecting more pain. "It's all right," he said softly. "You're safe now. They're gone." Her eyes opened fully then, revealing a startling shade of green despite the redness from the dust. "Who?" she croaked, her voice barely audible. "Name's Owen O'Malley. I'm going to help you if you'll let me." She tried to push herself up but collapsed with a groan of pain. "Ruby," she managed to whisper. "Ruby Mitchell. Miss Mitchell, I need to get you to a doctor. My horse can carry us both to town if you can hold on." Ruby nodded weakly, her eyes already closing again. Owen carefully lifted her into his arms, wincing at her involuntary cry of pain. Her clothes were torn, and her skin was a map of cuts, bruises, and burns from the rope and the rough terrain. "I'm sorry," he murmured as he carried her to his horse. With as much gentleness as he could manage, he lifted her onto the saddle, then mounted behind her, securing her against his chest with one arm while he took the reins with his free hand. "Hold on, Miss Mitchell. We'll have you fixed up soon enough." She made no reply, having slipped back into unconsciousness. Owen guided his horse toward the town of Redemption, some 5 miles to the east. As they rode, he found himself wondering what kind of men would do this to a woman family, no less. The West was a harsh place, but some acts of cruelty still managed to shock him. An hour later, they arrived at the small frontier town. Owen headed straight for Doc Wilson's office, shouting for help as he approached. The elderly doctor emerged from his building, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Good heavens, what happened to her?" the doctor asked as Owen dismounted, carefully cradling Ruby in his arms. "Found her being dragged behind a wagon, said it was her kin doing it." Doc Wilson's face darkened with anger. "Bring her inside, quickly." Owen carried Ruby into the doctor's office and laid her gently on the examination table. Her face was ashen beneath the dirt and blood, her breathing shallow. "You can wait outside, son," Doc Wilson said as he began cutting away the remains of Ruby's dress to assess her injuries. "I'll be right outside if you need me," Owen replied, reluctantly stepping out onto the porch. He removed his hat and ran a hand through his sweat-dampened hair, his mind filled with images of Ruby's brutalized body. He'd seen violence before, had dealt it out himself when necessary, but this was different. This was pure malice. The town marshal, a grizzled man named Hank Peterson, approached the doctor's office, drawn by the commotion of their arrival. "O'Malley," he nodded in greeting. "What's going on here?" Owen explained what he'd witnessed, describing the 2 men and the wagon as best he could. The marshal's expression grew grim as he listened. "Sounds like Vernon Mitchell and his friend Sela's pool," he said when Owen finished. "Vernon's uncle died recently, left his homestead to his daughter instead of him. Vernon wasn't too pleased about it." "Will you go after them?" Owen asked. Marshal Peterson sighed. "I'll try, but they've likely headed for the hills by now. Those 2 know the terrain better than most. If the girl survives to testify against them, we might have a chance of bringing them to justice." "She'll survive," Owen said with more confidence than he felt. "She's strong." The marshal gave him a curious look. "You don't even know her, O'Malley." Owen shrugged. "I know enough." After the marshal left, Owen settled onto the bench outside the doctor's office to wait. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the dusty street in shades of gold and amber. People passed by, some nodding to him in greeting, others casting curious glances toward the doctor's office. News traveled fast in small towns. Nearly 2 hours passed before Doc Wilson emerged, wiping his hands on a clean cloth. Owen stood immediately. "How is she?" the doctor sighed heavily. "She's alive, which is something of a miracle considering what she's been through. Multiple lacerations, bruises, rope burns, 2 cracked ribs, and a mild concussion. She's lost a fair amount of blood, and there's a risk of infection, but she's young and appears to be strong. Will she recover fully? With time and proper care, yes, I believe so. The physical wounds will heal. The others, he shrugged, that's harder to predict. Owen nodded his understanding. Can I see her? The doctor hesitated. She's sleeping now. I gave her laudanum for the pain. She needs rest more than anything. I'll be quiet, Owen promised. I just want to make sure she's all right. Doc Wilson studied him for a moment, then nodded. 5 minutes. Then you should get some rest yourself. You look like you could use it. Owen entered the small room where Ruby lay on a narrow bed. Her face had been cleaned of dirt and blood, revealing pale skin marked by scratches and bruises. Her auburn hair, now free of dust, spread across the pillow like a dark halo. Bandages wrapped her wrists where the rope had cut deepest, and a thin sheet covered the rest of her injuries. He stood beside the bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. In repose, with the lines of pain smoothed from her face, he could see she was beautiful not in the painted, artificial way of saloon girls, but with a natural grace that even her injuries couldn't disguise. I don't know your story, Miss Mitchell, he whispered, but I promise you this. The men who did this to you won't get away with it. Her eyelids fluttered slightly at the sound of his voice, but she didn't wake. Owen lingered a moment longer, then quietly left the room. Outside, Doc Wilson was waiting. She'll need somewhere to stay when she's well enough to leave here, the doctor said. Does she have any family in town? Owen shook his head. The marshal said her father recently died. And considering it was her cousin who did this to her, I doubt there's any family she can trust. There's the boarding house, I suppose, though Mrs. Hendricks runs a tight ship. She might not take kindly to a young woman with questionable circumstances. I have a spare room at my place, Owen found himself saying. She can stay there until she's back on her feet. The doctor raised an eyebrow. That's mighty generous of you, O'Malley. Some might say too generous for a single man to offer a single woman. I'm not offering anything improper, Owen replied stiffly. Just a safe place to recover. She can have the bedroom, I'll take the sofa. Doc Wilson studied him for a long moment, then nodded. I'll let her know when she wakes. It'll be her decision, of course. Of course, Owen agreed. Let me know what she decides. And if there's anything she needs in the meantime, I'll send word, the doctor assured him. Now go get some rest. You look dead on your feet. Owen reluctantly left the doctor's office and headed toward his small house on the outskirts of town. He'd built it himself after arriving in Redemption 3 years ago, needing a place to put down roots after years of drifting. It wasn't much, 2 rooms, a kitchen, and a porch, but it was his, paid for with honest work from his carpentry business. As he walked, he couldn't shake the image of Ruby's face from his mind. There was something about her that had grabbed hold of him from the moment he saw her being dragged through the dust. Maybe it was the sheer injustice of it, or maybe it was something else entirely. Whatever the reason, Owen knew with absolute certainty that his life had changed the moment he cut her free. The next morning, Owen woke early and headed back to the doctor's office, carrying a bundle of clean clothes he'd purchased from the general store. He'd guessed at Ruby's size, choosing a simple blue dress, undergarments, and a shawl. He felt awkward buying women's clothing, especially the more intimate items, but the shopkeeper's wife had been kind enough to assist him without asking too many questions. Doc Wilson was already up when Owen arrived, brewing coffee on the small stove in his office. She woke briefly during the night, he reported, pouring a cup for Owen. Fevers stayed down, which is a good sign. She's sleeping again now. Did she say anything about what happened? The doctor nodded grimly. Confirmed it was her cousin Vernon and his friend. Said Vernon wanted her father's land and threatened to kill her when she refused to sign it over. Apparently, He decided a tragic accident would solve his problems. Owen's hand tightened around the coffee cup. The marshal needs to hear this. Already sent my assistant to fetch him. He should be by later this morning. Doc Wilson eyed the bundle in Owen's arms. What's that you've brought? Some clothes. Figured hers were ruined. The doctor's eyes softened. That was thoughtful of you. I'm sure she'll appreciate it when she wakes. As if on cue, a soft sound came from the patient room, a moan followed by a sharp intake of breath. Doc Wilson moved quickly, with Owen close behind. Ruby was awake, trying unsuccessfully to sit up, her face contorted with pain. When she saw the two men enter, she froze, her eyes wide with fear. "It's all right, Miss Mitchell," Doc Wilson said soothingly. "You're safe. This is my office in Redemption. Do you remember me telling you that last night?" She relaxed slightly, her gaze darting between the doctor and Owen. "Yes," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I remember." Her eyes settled on Owen, confusion evident in her expression. You helped me." Owen nodded, suddenly feeling awkward under her scrutiny. "Yes, madam, Owen O'Malley. We met briefly yesterday, though you might not recall." "I remember," she said softly. "You cut me free, you saved my life." "Anyone would have done the same," he replied, uncomfortable with her gratitude. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "No, Mr. O'Malley, they wouldn't have, but you did, and I'm grateful." Doc Wilson checked her bandages and gave her another dose of laudanum for the pain. "You're healing well, all things considered. Another day or two of rest, and we can talk about moving you somewhere more comfortable." Ruby's face fell. I don't have anywhere to go. Vernon will be watching the homestead." "About that," Owen said, stepping forward, "I have a spare room at my place. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean and safe. You're welcome to stay there until you're fully recovered." Ruby looked at him with surprise. "That's very kind, but I couldn't impose. It's no imposition," Owen assured her. "I built the house myself, and it's sitting half empty most of the time anyway." She studied him intently, as if trying to discern his motives. Owen met her gaze steadily, wanting her to see he had no ulterior motives. "The marshal will be by later to take your statement," Doc Wilson interjected. "He'll want to go after Vernon and his friend." Ruby's expression hardened. "Good. They deserve to hang for what they did." She looked back at Owen. "Thank you for your offer, Mr. O'Malley. If Doc Wilson thinks it's appropriate, I'd be grateful for a place to stay." Owen nodded, relieved. "It's settled then. I brought you some clothes," he added, placing the bundle on the foot of the bed. "Wasn't sure of your size, but the shopkeeper's wife helped me choose." A faint blush colored Ruby's cheeks. "That was very thoughtful, thank you." "I'll leave you to rest," Owen said, suddenly eager to escape the intensity of her gaze. "Doc Wilson knows where to find me if you need anything." Outside, Owen took a deep breath of the clear morning air. His heart was racing, and he couldn't quite understand why. Ruby Mitchell was just a woman in need of help, nothing more. Yet something about the way she looked at him, with those remarkable green eyes, had set his pulse pounding like a young boy's. "Getting soft in your old age, O'Malley," he muttered to himself as he headed toward his workshop. At 32, he was hardly old, but he'd lived enough to know better than to get attached to someone he barely knew. Still, as he set to work on a cabinet he was building for the hotel, he found his thoughts continually drifting back to Ruby. 2 days later, Doc Wilson declared Ruby well enough to be moved. Her fever had stayed down, and though she was still weak and in pain, the risk of infection had passed. The marshal had taken her statement and sent wires to neighboring towns to be on the lookout for Vernon Mitchell and Sela's pool. But so far, there had been no sign of them. Owen arrived at the doctor's office mid-afternoon with a borrowed wagon, padded with blankets to make the short journey as comfortable as possible for Ruby. She was dressed in the blue dress he'd brought her, her auburn hair neatly braided down her back. Despite the bruises still visible on her face and the careful way she moved, she looked remarkably composed. "Ready to go, Miss Mitchell?" Owen asked, offering his arm for support. "Please call me Ruby," she replied with a small smile. "After all, we're going to be housemates, at least temporarily." "Ruby, then," he agreed, liking the way her name felt on his tongue. She leaned heavily on his arm as they walked slowly to the wagon, her breath catching with pain at each step. Owen wished he could carry her and spare her the discomfort, but he sensed she valued her independence too much to accept such help unless absolutely necessary. Once she was settled in the wagon, Doc Wilson handed Owen a small bottle of laudanum. "For the pain, if it gets too bad. No more than 2 drops at a time, and not more than 3 times a day." Owen nodded his understanding and tucked the bottle into his pocket. The doctor had already given him detailed instructions on changing Ruby's bandages and watching for signs of infection. It was a responsibility he took seriously. The journey to Owen's house took less than 15 minutes, but by the time they arrived, Ruby was pale and sweating from the effort of staying upright. This time, she didn't protest when Owen lifted her carefully from the wagon and carried her inside. His house was simple but well built, with large windows that let in plenty of light. The main room served as both parlor and dining area, with a small kitchen off to one side. 2 doors led to the bedrooms, one his, and one that had stood empty since he built the place, more out of hope than expectation that he might someday have a family to fill it. Owen carried Ruby to this second room, where he had spent the previous evening preparing for her arrival. Fresh linens covered the bed, and he'd placed a vase of wildflowers on the small table beside it. A rocking chair sat by the window, which looked out over the small garden he maintained. "It's lovely," Ruby said softly as he set her gently on the bed. "Much nicer than I expected." Owen felt a flush of pride at her words. "I'm glad you like it. The bathroom is through that door there. It's shared between the 2 rooms, but I'll make sure to knock. And there's a bell on the table if you need anything and I'm not within earshot." She looked around the room, then back at him, her expression unreadable. "Why are you doing all this, Mr. O'Malley? You don't even know me." Owen considered her question carefully. "I believe people should help each other when they can, and please call me Owen. Is that all?" She pressed, her green eyes searching his face. He smiled slightly. "Isn't that enough?" Ruby seemed about to say more, but instead nodded, wincing as the movement caused her pain. "For now, I suppose it is. Thank you. Owen, you should rest," he said, retreating toward the door. "I'll bring you some supper later, if you're feeling up to it." Alone in his kitchen, Owen began preparing a simple meal of beef stew and fresh bread he'd purchased from the bakery. As he worked, he found himself wondering about Ruby's life before he found her in the desert. What kind of woman was she? What dreams and hopes did she harbor? And what would she do once she was fully recovered? These questions lingered in his mind as he carried a tray to her room an hour later. He knocked softly, entering when he heard her quiet "come in." Ruby was propped up against the pillows, looking more rested than before. The bruises on her face stood out starkly against her pale skin, but her eyes were clear and alert. "I thought you might be hungry," Owen said, setting the tray across her lap. "Starving, actually," she admitted with a small smile. "It smells wonderful." Owen sat in the rocking chair as she ate, telling her about the town and its inhabitants to fill the silence. Redemption had started as a mining settlement 20 years earlier, but when the silver began to run out, it had transformed into a trading post and stop on the stagecoach line. Now it was home to about 500 souls, most of them honest folk trying to carve out a living in the harsh territory. "And what brought you here?" Ruby asked between careful bites of stew. "You don't strike me as a man who was born and raised in one place." Owen was surprised by her perceptiveness. "No, I wasn't. I was born in Boston, actually. My father was a shipbuilder." "A long way from the sea here," she observed. He nodded. "I left home at 17, worked my way west. Did a bit of everything: cowhand, railroad worker, even tried my hand at prospecting for a while. Found I had a knack for carpentry along the way. When I reached redemption 3 years ago, something about it felt right. Decided to stay, set up shop. And do you like it here? The settling down, I mean." Owen considered her question. "Most days. Sometimes I get the itch to move on, see what's over the next horizon. But then I remember there's value in putting down roots, building something that lasts." Ruby's expression grew wistful. "My father believed that too. He built our homestead from nothing, raised me there after my mother died. It wasn't an easy life, but it was ours." Her hands tightened around the spoon. "And now Vernon thinks he can just take it because I'm a woman alone." "The marshal will find him," Owen said, hoping he sounded more confident than he felt. "Justice will be served." "Perhaps," Ruby said, her voice tinged with doubt. "But even if Vernon is caught, what then? I can't run the homestead alone, not properly. It was hard enough with Pa." "You could sell it," Owen suggested. "Start fresh somewhere else." She shook her head firmly. "No, that land is all I have left of my family. I won't give it up, not after what Pa went through to keep it." She looked up at him, determination burning in her eyes despite her weakened state. "I'll find a way." Owen admired her spirit. Many would have been broken by what she'd endured, but Ruby Mitchell seemed made of sterner stuff. "Well, you don't have to figure it all out tonight," he said gently. "For now, focus on healing. The rest will come in time." She nodded, suddenly looking exhausted. Owen took the tray from her lap and helped her settle more comfortably against the pillows. "Thank you for the meal," she murmured, her eyes already closing. "And for everything else." "You're welcome, Ruby," he replied softly, but she was already drifting into sleep. Over the next week, Ruby's strength gradually returned. The bruises on her face faded from purple to yellow, and the deeper cuts began to heal into pink lines that would eventually become scars. She insisted on helping around the house as much as her injuries allowed, though Owen tried to convince her to rest. "I'm not an invalid," she declared on the 5th day when he found her attempting to wash dishes despite her still bandaged wrists. "And I won't be a burden." "You're not a burden," Owen assured her, gently taking the dishcloth from her hands. "You're a guest. A guest who's imposing on your hospitality with no end in sight," she countered. "At least let me earn my keep in some small way." They compromised. Ruby would handle the lighter household tasks, while Owen continued with the more strenuous ones. It established a routine that felt surprisingly comfortable, and Owen found himself enjoying her company more than he'd expected. Ruby was intelligent and well-read, despite having grown up on a remote homestead. Her father had valued education and had taught her from books he ordered from back east. She had opinions on everything from politics to literature, and she wasn't shy about expressing them. Their evenings often dissolved into spirited debates that left Owen both exasperated and exhilarated. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met," he told her one night after a particularly heated discussion about women's suffrage. Ruby's eyes sparkled with amusement. "And you, Mr. O'Malley, are remarkably set in your ways for a man who claims to value progress." "I value progress just fine," he protested. "I just think some things take time to change properly." "And some things need a good push," she retorted, then softened her words with a smile that made Owen's heart skip a beat. These moments of connection were becoming more frequent, and Owen found himself looking forward to them with an eagerness that both pleased and alarmed him. Ruby was recovering under his roof, vulnerable and dependent on his help. It would be dishonorable to take advantage of that situation, no matter how drawn to her he felt, and he was drawn to her more strongly with each passing day. It wasn't just her beauty, though that was undeniable. It was her resilience, her sharp mind, her quiet dignity even in the face of pain and uncertainty. Owen had known many women in his 32 years, but none like Ruby Mitchell. On the 10th day of her stay, Marshal Peterson stopped by with news. Vernon Mitchell and Sela's pool had been spotted in a mining camp 50 miles north, but they disappeared before the local law could apprehend them. "They're headed for the territories," the marshal said grimly. "Once they cross that line, they'll be hard to track." Ruby received the news with a calmness that Owen suspected masked deeper emotions. "So they'll get away with it," she said flatly. "For now, maybe," Marshal Peterson acknowledged. "But men like that eventually make mistakes. When they do, we'll be waiting." After the marshal left, Ruby retreated to the porch where she sat in silence, staring out at the gathering dusk. Owen gave her space for a while, then joined her, offering a cup of coffee which she accepted with a distracted nod. "Are you all right?" he asked, taking the chair beside her. "No," she answered honestly, "but I will be." They sat in companionable silence as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Finally, Ruby spoke again. "I need to go back to the homestead." Owen turned to look at her, surprised. "Are you sure that's wise? Vernon might return." "I can't hide forever," she said firmly. "That land is mine, and I won't be driven from it by fear. Besides, the spring planting needs to be done, or there won't be a harvest come fall. Ruby, you're still healing. Managing a homestead is hard work even for someone at full strength." She met his gaze steadily. "I know, but it's my home, Owen, the only one I have." He understood her determination, even as he worried for her safety. "At least wait another week," he suggested. "Give yourself more time to heal. And when you do go back, I'm coming with you at least for a few days to help you get settled." Ruby looked as if she might argue, but then nodded. "A week," she agreed. "And I would welcome your help, though I can't ask you to neglect your business." "I've got no pressing orders at the moment," Owen assured her. "Jacob can mind the shop for a few days." The matter decided, they lapsed back into silence, but Owen's mind was racing. The thought of Ruby alone at the isolated homestead troubled him deeply. Yet he understood her need to reclaim her home, to stand her ground despite the danger. It was the same stubborn courage that had helped her survive being dragged through the desert. The next week passed quickly. Ruby continued to regain her strength, and Owen found himself busy preparing for their journey to the Mitchell homestead. He purchased supplies, checked and rechecked his weapons, and made arrangements with his apprentice to handle any business that came in during his absence. The night before their planned departure, Owen sat at his workbench long after Ruby had retired to bed. He was crafting a small wooden box, carefully inlaying the lid with a pattern of wildflowers. It was a gift for Ruby, though he wasn't entirely sure why he felt compelled to make it. Perhaps as a reminder of her time in his home, or simply because he wanted to give her something made by his own hands. As he worked, he couldn't help but reflect on how quickly Ruby had become important to him. The thought of her leaving his house, of no longer sharing meals and conversations with her, left a hollow feeling in his chest. Yet he had no claim on her, no right to ask her to stay. "Careful, O'Malley," he muttered to himself as he applied a final coat of oil to the wood. "You're treading dangerous ground." The next morning dawned clear and bright. Owen loaded their supplies into his wagon while Ruby made a final inspection of the house, ensuring everything was in order. When she emerged onto the porch, she was wearing the blue dress he'd bought her, her hair braided and pinned neatly beneath a simple straw hat. "Ready?" Owen asked, offering his hand to help her into the wagon. Ruby nodded, her expression a mixture of determination and apprehension. "As I'll ever be." The Mitchell homestead lay 15 miles east of Redemption, a journey that would take most of the day by wagon. As they traveled, the landscape gradually changed from the scrubby desert around town to rolling grasslands dotted with clusters of trees. It was richer land, better suited for farming, though still demanding in its own way. Ruby grew quieter as they approached her home, her eyes scanning the horizon as if searching for signs of danger. Owen kept one hand near his pistol, equally vigilant. The marshal had assured them there had been no sign of Vernon or Sela's in the area, but Owen wasn't taking any chances. They crested a small rise, and suddenly the homestead came into view, a modest cabin with a barn and several outbuildings, nestled in a small valley with a creek running along one side. Fields stretched out around it, untended now but still showing the careful planning of Ruby's father. "It looks just the same," Ruby murmured, a catch in her voice. "I half expected to find it burned to the ground." "Vernon wouldn't destroy what he wants to possess," Owen said grimly. "He needs the land intact to claim it." They approached cautiously, but the homestead appeared deserted. Owen insisted on checking the cabin and outbuildings before allowing Ruby inside, his hand on his pistol as he moved from room to room. Finding nothing amiss, he finally called her in. The cabin was simple but solid, with 2 rooms and a loft. A layer of dust covered everything, evidence of Ruby's absence, but otherwise it was tidy and well-maintained. Family photographs adorned the walls, and books lined a small shelf beside the stone fireplace. Ruby moved through the space like a ghost, touching objects with reverent fingers, her father's pipe still on the mantel, her mother's quilt folded at the foot of the bed, the Bible on the table with a pressed flower marking a page. "Welcome home," Owen said softly. She turned to him, tears shining in her eyes but a smile on her lips. "Yes, home." They spent the remainder of the daylight hours checking the property and assessing what needed to be done. The fields would need plowing before planting could begin, and the garden had become overgrown in Ruby's absence. The livestock, a milk cow, 2 horses, and some chickens had been cared for by a neighboring farmer at Ruby's request before she left to confront Vernon in town. But they would need better accommodations for the coming season. By the time darkness fell, they were both exhausted. Owen built a fire in the hearth while Ruby prepared a simple meal from the supplies they'd brought. They ate in comfortable silence, tired but satisfied with the day's work. "I'll sleep in the barn," Owen said as they cleaned up after supper. "Give you your privacy." Ruby looked up from the dish she was drying. "That's not necessary. You can take the loft. It's where Pa slept after I got old enough to need my own room." "Are you sure?" "I don't want to intrude," she nodded. "I'm sure. Besides, it would be foolish to have you so far away if Vernon should return." The unspoken fear hung between them. Despite her courage in returning to the homestead, Ruby was clearly nervous about the possibility of her cousin reappearing. "All right," Owen agreed. "The loft it is." "But if you change your mind, I won't," she said with a small smile. "I trust you, Owen." Her words warmed him more than they should have. "Thank you. That means a great deal." Later, as Owen climbed the ladder to the loft, he found himself acutely aware of Ruby moving about in the room below. The cabin suddenly seemed very small, the space between them too intimate for comfort. He lay on the narrow bed, listening to the soft sounds of her preparing for sleep, the rustle of fabric as she changed, the creak of her bed as she settled in, the soft sigh that escaped her as she extinguished the lamp. "Good night, Owen," she called softly. "Good night, Ruby," he replied, staring up at the dark ceiling. "Sleep well." Sleep, however, proved elusive for Owen. His mind was too full of Ruby, her smile, her determination, the trust she'd placed in him. He'd come to help her reclaim her home, but he was beginning to fear he might lose his heart in the process. Morning brought a return to practical matters. After breakfast, Owen set to work repairing the chicken coop while Ruby tackled the garden, clearing weeds and preparing the soil for planting. The physical labor was good for both of them, providing a distraction from the tension that had been building between them. By midday, the spring sun was high and hot. Owen paused in his work, wiping sweat from his brow, and glanced toward the garden. Ruby had removed her hat, and the sunlight caught in her auburn hair, making it glow like burnished copper. She was kneeling in the dirt, her face flushed with exertion, a smudge of soil on her cheek. To Owen, she had never looked more beautiful. As if sensing his gaze, she looked up and caught him watching. Instead of looking away, Owen smiled at her. After a moment, Ruby smiled back, a genuine expression that lit up her face and made his heart race. The moment was broken by the sound of approaching hooves. Owen's hand went immediately to his pistol as he moved to stand between Ruby and the approaching rider. She rose quickly from the garden, coming to stand beside him despite his protective gesture. The rider came into view, a middle-aged man on a dappled mare, his weathered face breaking into a smile as he recognized Ruby. "Miss Mitchell, thank the Lord you're all right," he called, reining in his horse. "When we heard what Vernon did, Mr. Collins," Ruby greeted him, visibly relaxing. "It's good to see you." Owen lowered his hand from his pistol as Ruby introduced him to Thomas Collins, their nearest neighbor whose farm lay 3 miles to the north. Collins had been looking after the Mitchell livestock during Ruby's absence and had formed a friendship with her father over the years. "Marshal Peterson sent word you might be returning," Collins explained. "I've been riding by every day, hoping to catch sight of you." "Martha, that's my wife, she's been worried sick about you." "As you can see, I'm fine," Ruby assured him, though the fading bruises on her face told a different story. "Thanks to Mr. O'Malley here." Collins studied Owen with newfound interest. "Well, sir, you have the thanks of all decent folk in these parts. What Vernon and that no-good Silas did," he broke off, shaking his head in disgust. "Begging your pardon, Miss Ruby, but your cousin always was a bad seed. Your pa knew it too. Has there been any sign of them?" Owen asked. Collins shook his head. "Not around here. Word is they were spotted heading north toward the territories. Cowards, running rather than facing what they've done." They invited Collins to join them for lunch, and over the meal, he filled them in on local happenings and offered his help with the spring planting. "I've got my 2 boys who can lend a hand," he said. "We'll have those fields ready in no time." Ruby thanked him but hesitated to accept. "I don't want to impose nonsense," Collins interrupted. "It's what neighbors do. Your pa would have done the same for any of us." After Collins departed, promising to return with his sons in 2 days' time, Ruby turned to Owen with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking about what you said in town about not being able to run the homestead alone." Owen nodded, remembering their conversation. "What about it? You were right. It is too much for one person, but I've been considering my options, and I think I might have a solution." She took a deep breath. "I could hire help, maybe even a partner of sorts, someone to share in the work and the profits." "That's a sound idea," Owen agreed. "Do you have someone in mind?" Ruby held his gaze steadily. "What about you?" The question caught Owen completely off guard. "Me." "Yes, you. You're good with your hands, knowledgeable about building and repairs. You mentioned you've worked as a cowhand before, so you know something about livestock. And..." She hesitated, then continued more softly. I trust you, Owen, more than anyone else I've known in a long time." Owen was speechless for a moment, his mind racing with the implications of her proposal. "Ruby, I'm flattered by your offer, but my business in town, you could keep it," she said quickly. "Maybe split your time or hire someone to help there as well. I'm not asking you to give up what you've built, just to consider adding to it." The idea was tempting, more so than Owen wanted to admit. The thought of working alongside Ruby, helping to build something together, stirred feelings he'd been trying to ignore since the day he cut her free from that wagon. "Can I think about it?" he asked finally. "It's a big decision for both of us." Ruby nodded, looking relieved that he hadn't outright refused. "Of course. There's no rush." But even as he said the words, Owen knew he was only delaying the inevitable. The pull he felt toward Ruby Mitchell went beyond mere attraction or the satisfaction of having helped her. It was deeper, more profound, a recognition of something essential in her that called to something equally essential in him. That evening, after Ruby had retired to her room, Owen sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The homestead was peaceful, the only sounds the gentle lowing of the cow in the barn and the distant call of a night bird. It was a good place, he thought. A place where a man could put down roots, build a life. The creak of the door behind him announced Ruby's presence before he turned to see her. She had changed into a simple nightgown covered by a shawl, her hair loose around her shoulders. Owen stood automatically, suddenly aware of the impropriety of the situation, but Ruby waved him back to his seat. "I couldn't sleep," she explained, settling into the chair beside his. "Too many thoughts." "About the homestead?" he asked, though he suspected her insomnia had the same source as his own restlessness. "Partly," she admitted, "and about other things." They sat in silence for a while, the night air cool around them. Finally, Ruby spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "When Vernon tied me to that wagon, I was certain I was going to die. I remember thinking about all the things I'd never done, never experienced. It's strange how clear your regrets become when you think your time has run out." Owen turned to look at her profile in the dim light from the window. "What did you regret most?" She was quiet for so long that he thought she might not answer. Then, so softly he had to strain to hear, she said, "Never having been in love. Never having someone look at me the way my father looked at my mother in the photographs on our wall." The vulnerability in her admission touched something deep in Owen's heart. "Ruby, you don't have to say anything," she interrupted, still not looking at him. "I'm not expecting anything. I just wanted you to know that these past weeks, staying with you, getting to know you, they've meant more to me than I can express. Whatever you decide about my offer, I'll always be grateful for what you did that day in the desert." Unable to contain his feelings any longer, Owen reached out and gently turned her face toward his. "Ruby Mitchell, from the moment I saw you being dragged through that dust, something changed in me. I didn't understand it then, and I'm not sure I fully understand it now. But I do know that the thought of leaving you alone here, of returning to my empty house in town without you, it feels wrong, like turning away from something vital." Her eyes widened at his words, hope and uncertainty warring in their green depths. "What are you saying, Owen?" "I'm saying yes to your offer," he replied, his thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw. "But I need you to know that my reasons go beyond practical considerations. I care for you, Ruby, more than I thought possible in such a short time." A smile slowly bloomed on her face, transforming it in the moonlight. "I care for you too," she whispered. "I tried not to. It seemed too soon, too unlikely, but I couldn't help it." Owen's heart soared at her words. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle kiss. Ruby responded with a softness that belied the strength he knew she possessed, her hand coming up to rest against his chest. When they broke apart, both slightly breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "We should take this slowly," he murmured. "Give ourselves time to be sure." Ruby nodded, though she didn't move away from him. Yes, time. But they both knew, in that moment beneath the stars, that time would only strengthen what had already begun between them, a bond forged in dust and danger, tempered by kindness and respect, and now blossoming into something neither had expected to find. Over the next few days, Owen and Ruby fell into a comfortable rhythm, working side by side to prepare the homestead for the coming season. True to his word, Thomas Collins arrived with his sons, and together they made quick work of plowing the fields. Ruby's garden began to take shape, with neat rows of vegetables sprouting from the newly turned soil. The chicken coop was repaired, the barn cleaned and organized, and the cabin itself grew brighter as Ruby washed windows and hung fresh curtains. Throughout it all, Owen found himself watching Ruby with increasing admiration. Despite her still healing injuries, she worked tirelessly, her determination never wavering. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, talking about their days and making plans for their future, together on this land. Their newfound closeness evolved naturally, with shy touches becoming more confident, brief kisses growing longer and more passionate. Yet they maintained the boundaries they had set, sleeping in separate rooms and focusing on building a foundation of trust and understanding between them. A week after their arrival at the homestead, Owen reluctantly prepared to return to town for a few days. He had orders to complete and arrangements to make if he was to divide his time between his carpentry business and the farm. "I'll be back as soon as I can," he promised as he loaded his horse. 3 days at most. Ruby nodded, trying to hide her anxiety at the thought of being alone. "I'll be fine. Mr. Collins said he'd check in on me, and I have Pa's shotgun if there's any trouble." Owen pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I don't like leaving you here alone." "I know," she said against his chest, "but we both knew you'd have to go back eventually. Better to get it over with now while Vernon is still far away." He kissed her then, a lingering kiss that conveyed all the things he wasn't quite ready to say aloud. When they parted, Ruby's cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright. 3 days, she repeated. "I'll be counting the hours." Owen mounted his horse, his heart heavy with reluctance. "Be safe, Ruby. If there's any sign of trouble, I'll ride straight to the Collins place," she assured him. "Now go before I change my mind and beg you to stay." With a final wave, Owen rode away, forcing himself not to look back until he reached the top of the rise. From there, he could see Ruby still standing in the yard, her hand raised in farewell. The image stayed with him as he made the journey back to Redemption. The town seemed smaller somehow, less vibrant than he remembered. Owen went directly to his workshop, where his apprentice, Jacob, greeted him with enthusiasm and a list of orders that had accumulated in his absence. The work was a welcome distraction, keeping his hands busy even as his mind continually returned to Ruby and the homestead. That evening, as he sat alone in his house, Owen was struck by how empty it felt without Ruby's presence. Her absence was palpable in the silent rooms, in the undisturbed neatness that lacked the comfortable disorder of shared living. He wandered from room to room, touching objects she had used, a book she had been reading, a cup she had favored for her morning coffee. In her bedroom, everything had been left exactly as she had arranged it, as if awaiting her return. Owen stood in the doorway, remembering how he had carried her in that first day, how vulnerable and determined she had been even then. On the bedside table sat the wooden box he had made for her, the gift he hadn't yet given. He picked it up, running his fingers over the inlaid wildflowers, and made a decision. The next morning, Owen visited the bank, where he withdrew a significant portion of his savings. From there, he went to see Marshal Peterson, informing him of his plans to split his time between town and the Mitchell homestead. "Figured as much," the marshal said with a knowing smile. "The way you two looked at each other, it was only a matter of time." Owen felt his ears grow warm. "It's a practical arrangement," he protested weakly. "The homestead needs work, and Ruby can't manage alone." "Sure, O'Malley," Peterson chuckled. "Purely practical." His next stop was the general store, where he purchased supplies for the homestead and one additional item that he tucked carefully into his pocket. By midday, he had completed his errands and returned to his workshop to finish the most pressing orders. Jacob worked alongside him, curious about the Mitchell homestead and even more curious about Ruby herself. Owen found himself speaking of her with a warmth that made his apprentice grin knowingly. "Sounds like you found yourself a special lady, Mr. O'Malley," Jacob observed as they finished a rocking chair for the hotel lobby. Owen couldn't deny it. "She's unlike anyone I've ever known," he admitted. "Strong, brave, stubborn as the day is long. When will you bring her to town again?" "I'd like to meet the woman who's got you so bewitched." "Soon enough," Owen replied, though in truth, he was in no hurry to share Ruby with anyone just yet. Their time together at the homestead had created a private world that felt almost sacred, and the thought of disrupting it with the curiosities and judgments of others was unappealing. By the evening of the second day, Owen had completed enough work to justify an early return to the homestead. He would leave at first light, he decided, eager to see Ruby again and to share with her all he had accomplished in town. As he packed his saddlebags that night, his hand closed around the small velvet pouch in his pocket. It was too soon, he knew. They had known each other barely a month. Yet the certainty he felt about Ruby, about their future together, was unshakable. The ring would wait until the right moment, but he wanted to have it with him, a tangible reminder of his intentions. Owen rode out of redemption as the sun crested the eastern horizon, pushing his horse to a steady pace that would bring him to the homestead by mid-morning. The anticipation of seeing Ruby again made the journey seem longer than it was, each mile stretching endlessly before him. When he finally crested the rise overlooking the Mitchell property, his heart leaped at the sight of smoke rising from the cabin chimney. Ruby was up and about, probably preparing breakfast. The thought made him smile. As he rode into the yard, the cabin door flew open and Ruby appeared, her face lighting up at the sight of him. She wore a simple dress, her hair loosely braided, and to Owen, she had never looked more beautiful. "You're early," she called, hurrying toward him as he dismounted. Owen caught her in his arms, lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm. "Couldn't stay away," he admitted, breathing in the scent of her soap and sunshine and something uniquely Ruby. She laughed as he set her down, her hands lingering on his shoulders. "I'm glad. The place felt too quiet without you. How have you been? Any trouble?" Ruby shook her head. "None at all. Mr. Collins and his son stopped by yesterday to check on me, and I've had visitors from 2 other neighboring farms. Word has spread about what happened, and it seems the community has decided I need looking after." "Good neighbors are a blessing," Owen said, relieved that she hadn't been entirely alone. "Come inside," she urged, taking his hand. "I've just made coffee and there's fresh bread." The cabin was warm and inviting, filled with the aroma of baking. As they sat at the table, Ruby poured coffee and cut thick slices of bread, spreading them with butter and honey. Owen watched her movements, struck anew by how right it felt to be here with her, how naturally they had fallen into a shared life. "I spoke with Jacob about spending more time here," he he said as they ate. "He's capable of handling most of the business in town on his own, with me coming in a few days a week for the more complex projects." Ruby looked up, her expression hopeful. "So you're really staying, making this arrangement permanent?" Owen reached across the table to take her hand. "If that's still what you want. I've given it a lot of thought, Ruby. This place, this life, it's what I want. With you," her fingers tightened around his. "It's what I want too, more than anything." The conviction in her voice emboldened him. "I brought something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket for the wooden box he'd made. "I finished it before we left town, but never found the right moment to give it to you." Ruby accepted the box with curious eyes, running her fingers over the inlaid wildflowers. "It's beautiful," she murmured, opening the lid to reveal the velvet-lined interior. "Did you make this?" Owen nodded. "For your keepsakes. I noticed you kept your mother's locket in a drawer, and I thought you might like something special to store it in." Tears welled in Ruby's eyes as she looked from the box to Owen. "No one has ever made me something so thoughtful. Thank you." She leaned across the table to kiss him, a tender gesture that quickly deepened into something more passionate. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I missed you," Ruby whispered, her cheeks flushed. "More than I expected to." "I missed you too," Owen replied. "The house in town felt empty without you." They spent the remainder of the day working together, falling back into their comfortable rhythm as if the separation had never occurred. Owen repaired a broken fence while Ruby tended to the animals, and together they planted the last section of the garden. As the sun began to set, they prepared dinner side by side in the small kitchen, moving around each other with an ease that spoke of growing familiarity. The simple meal tasted better than any Owen could remember, enhanced by Ruby's company and the satisfaction of a day's work well done. After dinner, they sat on the porch as had become their custom, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Ruby leaned against Owen's shoulder, her hand entwined with his. "Tell me about Boston," she said softly. "What was it like growing up there?" Owen thought back to his childhood, to the crowded streets and the constant noise of the shipyards. Different from here in every way. "Always busy, always noisy. My father's workshop was near the harbor, and I grew up surrounded by the smell of sawdust and sea air." "Do you miss it?" He considered the question carefully. "Sometimes I miss the sea. The vastness of it, the way it makes you feel both insignificant and infinite at the same time. But Boston itself? No, it never felt like home, not really." Ruby nodded her understanding. "And this?" she asked, gesturing to the homestead spread out before them. "Could this be home for you?" Owen turned to look at her, seeing in her eyes the same hope that filled his heart. "It already is," he said simply, "because you're here." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Ruby's eyes searched his face, looking for reassurance of his sincerity. "Owen," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I know it's only been a short time, but I feel as if I've known you forever. Is that strange?" He shook his head, drawing her closer. "Not strange at all. I feel the same way. When you found me that day, cut me free from that rope, it was like waking up from a nightmare into something better than any dream I'd ever had. Even through the pain and fear, I knew something important had happened, something that would change everything." Owen's heart raced at her words, so closely mirroring his own feelings. "Ruby Mitchell," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "I believe some things in this life are meant to be. Some paths are destined to cross. Finding you that day wasn't chance, it was providence." Ruby's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I believe that too," she whispered. Unable to resist any longer, Owen reached into his pocket and withdrew the small velvet pouch. "I know it's too soon," he said, opening the pouch to reveal a simple gold ring set with a small emerald. I know we should wait, be sensible, but nothing about this feels like something that should follow the usual rules or timelines. Ruby's eyes widened as she looked from the ring to Owen's face. It was my mother's, he explained. The only thing of hers I kept when I left Boston. I've carried it with me all these years, waiting for. I didn't know what until now. He took a deep breath, gathering his courage. Ruby Mitchell, I love you. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I cut you free from that rope, and every day since has only deepened those feelings. I want to build a life with you, here on this land your father loved. I want to be your partner in all things. Will you marry me? For one heart-stopping moment, Ruby was silent, her eyes wide with surprise. Then, with a soft cry, she threw her arms around his neck. Yes, she breathed against his ear. Yes, Owen O'Malley, I will marry you. Joy surged through Owen as he held her close, hardly able to believe his good fortune. When they finally pulled apart, he slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands. It fit perfectly, the emerald catching the last light of day. It matches your eyes, he said softly. Ruby looked down at the ring, then back at Owen, her face radiant with happiness. I love you, she said, the words clearly coming from the depths of her heart. I love you so much it frightens me sometimes. Don't be frightened, he murmured, drawing her close again. We're in this together now, for better or worse. Their lips met in a kiss that sealed their promise, deep and tender and full of hope for the future they would build together. When they finally broke apart, twilight had given way to night, the homestead bathed in silvery moonlight. When? Ruby asked, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. When shall we be married? Owen considered the question. As soon as possible, he decided. There's the minister in Redemption, or we could ride to the county seat if you prefer something more formal. Ruby shook her head. I don't need formal, just you and perhaps a few friends to witness. Mr. and Mrs. Collins, Doc Wilson, the marshal. Next Sunday, then, Owen suggested. I can have everything arranged by then. Ruby nodded, her smile widening. Next Sunday, I'll be Mrs. O'Malley. The name sounded right to both of them, a new beginning built on the foundation of all they had already shared. That night, they parted at Ruby's bedroom door with lingering kisses and whispered promises, both looking forward to the day when such partings would no longer be necessary. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Owen rode into town to speak with the minister and to invite those they wished to attend the small ceremony. Ruby cleaned the cabin from top to bottom and worked on a special dress, using fabric she found in her mother's trunk. Word of their engagement spread quickly through the community, and soon they were receiving visitors bearing gifts and well wishes. The Collins family brought a handmade quilt, while another neighbor arrived with a pair of young apple trees to plant near the cabin. Doc Wilson sent a basket of medicinal herbs and teas, along with a note expressing his delight at their news. On the Saturday before the wedding, Owen worked from dawn until dusk building a surprise for Ruby, a new rocking chair for the porch, carved with the same wildflower pattern as the wooden box he had given her. It was his wedding gift to her, a symbol of the home they would share and the quiet evenings they would spend together watching the sun set over their land. That evening, as they sat side by side on the porch, Ruby's head resting on Owen's shoulder, a rider appeared on the horizon. Owen tensed automatically, his hand moving toward the pistol he kept nearby, but as the figure drew closer, he recognized the unmistakable silhouette of Marshal Peterson. "Evening, Marshal," Owen called as Peterson rode into the yard. "What brings you out this way so late?" The marshal dismounted, his expression grim. "News," he said simply. "Vernon Mitchell and Sela's pool were spotted in Carson City yesterday. They were asking about trains heading east." Ruby stiffened beside Owen. East? You mean they're coming back this way? Peterson nodded. Looks that way. I thought you should know, given the circumstances. Might be nothing they could be heading anywhere east of Nevada, but I figured you'd want to be prepared just in case. Owen's arm tightened around Ruby's shoulders. We appreciate the warning, Marshal. Will you be staying in the area? Got a deputy patrolling between here and the Collins place, Peterson assured them. And I'll be checking in regularly myself. Just keep your eyes open and your weapons close. After the marshal departed, Ruby was quiet, her earlier happiness dimmed by the news. Owen led her back inside the cabin where he built up the fire against the evening chill. They won't come here, he said with more confidence than he felt. They'd be fools to try, knowing the marshal is watching for them. Ruby nodded, but her eyes were troubled. What if they do, Owen? What if they come back for the land or for revenge? Then they'll find me waiting for them, he said firmly. I won't let anyone hurt you, Ruby, not ever again. She came to him then, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her head against his chest. I know. It's just tomorrow is supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. I don't want it overshadowed by fear. Owen kissed the top of her head. It won't be. Tomorrow you'll become my wife, and nothing, not Vernon, not Sela's, not anything in this world can diminish the joy of that. His words seemed to reassure her, and they spent the remainder of the evening close to the fire, talking of their future and the life they would build together. When they finally parted for the night, Ruby's smile had returned, though Owen noticed she checked the locks on the doors and windows twice before retiring to her room. Owen lay awake for a long time, listening to the night sounds around the homestead, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft whicker of horses in the barn, the creak of the cabin settling. His pistol lay within easy reach, and he had cleaned and loaded the shotgun earlier in the day. They were as prepared as they could be, he told himself. Yet sleep remained elusive, driven away by thoughts of Vernon Mitchell and what the man might do if he returned. Morning dawned clear and bright, the sky a perfect blue that seemed to promise good fortune. Owen rose early and went about his chores, keeping a watchful eye on the horizon as he worked. By mid-morning, there had been no sign of trouble, and he allowed himself to hope that the day would proceed as planned. Inside the cabin, Ruby was preparing for the ceremony. She had insisted that Owen not see her in her wedding dress until the minister arrived, adhering to tradition despite the unusual circumstances of their marriage. Owen respected her wishes, staying outside until the appointed time. The first guests began to arrive shortly after noon, the Collins family, followed by several other neighbors. Doc Wilson came in a buggy with the minister, both men dressed in their Sunday best. Marshal Peterson arrived last, his deputy in tow, both men scanning the surroundings with professional vigilance. The small gathering assembled in front of the cabin, where Owen had arranged chairs in a semicircle. He stood beside the minister, his heart pounding with anticipation as he waited for Ruby to appear. When she stepped through the cabin door, Owen's breath caught in his throat. She wore a simple dress of ivory muslin, adorned with lace at the collar and cuffs. Her auburn hair was arranged in loose curls around her face, and she carried a small bouquet of wildflowers gathered from the meadow that morning. But it was her smile, radiant and full of love, that truly took his breath away. Ruby walked slowly toward him, her eyes never leaving his face. As she reached his side, Owen took her hand, feeling the slight tremor that matched his own. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying clearly in the still afternoon air. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, the traditional vows spoken with genuine emotion. When Owen placed the gold band on Ruby's finger to join the engagement ring, his hands were steady, his heart full to bursting with joy. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Owen drew Ruby into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that conveyed all the love he felt. The small gathering erupted in applause and cheers, and for that perfect moment, all thoughts of danger were forgotten in the celebration of their union. The reception that followed was simple but joyous. Tables had been set up in the yard, laden with food contributed by the guests. Mrs. Collins had baked a wedding cake, decorated with fresh berries and flowers. Wine flowed freely, and soon laughter and conversation filled the air. Owen found himself watching Ruby as she moved among their guests, her face glowing with happiness. His wife. The thought filled him with a profound sense of contentment and purpose. Whatever challenges they might face, they would face them together. As the afternoon waned, the first guests began to depart, offering final congratulations and well wishes. Marshal Peterson approached Owen as the crowd thinned, his expression serious beneath his forced smile. "No sign of Mitchell or Poole," he reported quietly. "But I'll have a man keeping watch tonight just to be safe." Owen nodded his appreciation. "Thank you, Marshal, for everything." Peterson clapped him on the shoulder. "Be happy, O'Malley. You two deserve it." By sunset, only Doc Wilson remained, helping to clean up the last of the celebration. As he prepared to leave, he pulled Owen aside. "I've known Ruby since she was a little girl," he said solemnly. "Watched her grow up, tended to her when she was ill. Her father was a good friend to me." He paused, his eyes searching Owen's face. "He would have approved of you, son. I want you to know that." The old doctor's words touched Owen deeply. "Thank you, Doc. That means a great deal." After Wilson departed, Owen and Ruby stood in the yard, watching his buggy disappear over the rise. The homestead was quiet once more, the golden light of evening casting long shadows across the land that was now truly theirs together. "Mrs. O'Malley," Owen said softly, drawing Ruby into his arms. "How does it feel?" She smiled up at him, her eyes reflecting the last light of day. "Like coming home," she replied. "Like finally finding where I belong." They sealed their words with a kiss, standing in the yard of the homestead that had witnessed so much pain and fear, courage and determination, and now, at last, the beginning of a love that would endure. Later that night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of what was now their shared bedroom, Owen held Ruby close, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing. Outside, the world continued its age-old dance, stars wheeling overhead, night creatures calling to one another, the wind whispering through the grass. But within the walls of their cabin, there was only peace and the profound certainty that, whatever the future might hold, they would face it together. "I love you, Ruby O'Malley," Owen whispered into the darkness, her arms tightened around him in response. "And I love you, Owen O'Malley. Today, tomorrow, and all the days to come." In that moment, the memory of their first meeting of dust and blood and fear seemed impossibly distant, transformed by the alchemy of love into the beginning of their story rather than an ending. From violence had come tenderness, from cruelty kindness, from the threat of death a new and vibrant life together. And as they drifted into sleep, secure in each other's arms, both knew with unshakable certainty that they had found in each other not just love, but home. 5 years later, the Mitchell O'Malley homestead had flourished beyond Owen and Ruby's most optimistic hopes. The fields yielded abundant harvests, the orchards they had planted were beginning to bear fruit, and the herd of cattle Owen had slowly accumulated grazed contentedly on the expanded pasture land. The cabin had grown as well, with Owen adding rooms as their family increased. Their first child, a daughter they named Grace after Ruby's mother, had arrived a year after their wedding, a tiny, perfect being with Ruby's green eyes and Owen's dark hair. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, Samuel, named for Ruby's father. And now, Ruby carried their third child, due to arrive with the first snows of winter. Owen's carpentry business continued to thrive in town, where Jacob had become a full partner, allowing Owen to spend most of his time at the homestead. He still took on special commissions, furniture mostly, pieces that allowed him to express his artistry while providing additional income for their growing family. Vernon Mitchell and Sela's pool had never returned to redemption. Word had reached them eventually that the two men had been arrested in Kansas City for armed robbery. Vernon had been killed trying to escape, while Sela's was serving a lengthy prison sentence. The news had brought Ruby a sense of closure, allowing the last shadows of fear to dissipate from their lives. On this particular autumn evening, Owen sat on the porch of their home, watching Ruby in the garden with their children. Grace, now 4 years old, was helping her mother collect the last of the season's tomatoes, her small face serious with concentration. Samuel, at 2, was more interested in the grasshoppers that leaped ahead of his tottering steps, his delighted laughter carrying across the yard. Ruby looked up, catching Owen's gaze, and smiled the smile that still had the power to quicken his heartbeat. She was more beautiful to him now than on the day he'd married her. Her beauty deepened by the years they'd shared, by the children she'd given him, by the countless small moments of joy and struggle that had woven their lives together. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the land they had nurtured together, Owen reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that first desperate encounter in the dust of the desert, to this peaceful evening surrounded by the family they had created, it was a path neither of them could have imagined, yet one that seemed, in retrospect, to have been waiting for them all along. Grace came running to him then, her small hands filled with tomatoes. "Look, Papa, I helped Mama." Owen lifted her onto his lap, careful not to crush her precious harvest. "You certainly did, little one. Those are the finest tomatoes I've ever seen." Ruby followed more slowly, carrying Samuel on her hip, his head resting sleepily against her shoulder. She sat beside Owen, their family complete in the quiet intimacy of the gathering dusk. "Happy?" Owen asked softly, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. Ruby's smile was answer enough, but she spoke anyway, her voice filled with the quiet contentment that had become the foundation of their life together. "More than I ever dreamed possible." And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Owen O'Malley knew with absolute certainty that the day he had ridden hard to cut a stranger free from the dust had been the most important day of his life, the day he had found not just Ruby, but himself, and the future they were meant to share.